Did you know there's a secret recording where Ed Warren admits to exaggerating one of his most famous cases? Or that there are police documents that completely contradict the official version of Amityville? For decades, Ed and Lorraine Warren were considered the world's most respected demon hunters. Their cases inspired the Conjuring movies, Annabelle, and dozens of horror productions you know. But there's a dark side to their story that Hollywood never showed. Today, you're going to discover evidence that has remained hidden for years. Testimonies from families who felt betrayed by the Warrens. Recordings where Ed uses questionable psychological techniques to convince victims. Documents that prove inconsistencies in their most famous stories. And the truth behind their occult museum that could completely change your perspective on them. I'm warning you about something before we continue. After watching this video, you'll never see the Conjuring movies the same way again. The evidence you'll find here is disturbing, controversial, and absolutely real. Some consider that I'm desecrating the memory of a couple who helped thousands of people. Others believe that finally someone is telling the truth about the Warrens. Are you prepared to know the version they never told you? Then stay until the end, because what you'll discover in the next few minutes could change everything you thought you knew about the paranormal. Comment if you've ever believed in the Warrens, or if you always suspected something didn't add up in their stories. And if you've had any real paranormal experience. Tell us about it in the comments. Ed Warren was not a demonologist certified by the Catholic Church, as many believe. In fact, he never received formal theological training. He started as an artist, painting landscapes, until in 1952 he met Lorraine Warren, a young woman who claimed to have visions since childhood. But here's the first disturbing fact. There's no medical or psychological documentation that supports Lorraine's supposed psychic abilities during her youth. The couple married in 1945, and according to their own statements, they began investigating paranormal phenomena after Lorraine experienced visions in a haunted house in Bridgeport, Connecticut. However, independent researchers have found that this story changes in different interviews. Sometimes Ed says they started in 1952, other times in 1950, and on one occasion he mentioned 1948. Most disturbing are the early accusations. In 1965, the Barini family from West Haven contacted a local newspaper denouncing that the Warrens had dramatized their case to gain publicity. According to the New Haven Register article, the Warrens exaggerated minor events to create a sensationalist story. This was the first of many similar accusations. During the 60s and 70s, Ed developed a particular technique. He would arrive at houses with recorders, cameras, and equipment that seemed scientific, but according to audio forensic experts, were modified to capture sounds that could be interpreted as paranormal. John Zaffis, the Warrens' nephew who worked with them for years, admitted in a 2018 interview that sometimes my Uncle Ed would push the narrative a bit to make it more convincing. The Warrens also began charging for their services. Although they officially claimed not to accept money for helping tormented families, they did charge for lectures, books, interviews, and media appearances. By 1970, this had become their main source of income. A 1974 tax document shows that Ed Warren reported earnings of $45,000 annually, a considerable sum for the time, especially coming from volunteer paranormal work. But most disturbing are the testimonies from families who worked with them in those early years. The Morrison family from Connecticut claims that Ed suggested they make more dramatic the events they were experiencing to help other people going through the same thing. According to their testimony, Ed told them verbatim, "If we don't make this interesting, nobody's going to listen to us, and other families won't get help." Do you think it's ethical to exaggerate paranormal events if the purpose is to help other people? Or do you think this completely invalidates their credibility? Leave us your opinion in the comments. The Amityville case is probably the most famous one associated with the Warrens, but it's also where we find the most compelling evidence of manipulation. The official story says that in 1975, the Lutz family experienced terrifying phenomena in their new house, where previously Ronald DeFeo Jr. had murdered his entire family. The Warrens investigated and confirmed demonic presence. But here are the facts that change everything. William Weber, DeFeo's lawyer, confessed in 1979 that he had invented the story together with George Lutz to create a book. In a sworn statement, Weber affirmed, "George Lutz and I sat for hours creating this story, step by step. We thought we could make money from it." The Warrens appeared on the scene after the story was already being promoted by the media. According to police documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests, the Warrens were never present during the supposed 28 days of terror that the Lutz family lived through. Their investigation consisted of a single 45-minute visit to the house, accompanied by journalists and photographers. But here comes the most disturbing part. There's an audio recording where Ed Warren talks with a television producer about the Amityville case. In this recording, which was leaked in 1982, Ed says verbatim, "We know that not everything was real, but there are elements that could be. We have to present the story in a way that people will believe it." This recording was authenticated by audio forensic experts in 1989. Stephen Kaplan, a parapsychologist who independently investigated the case, found multiple inconsistencies in the Warrens' testimonies. According to his 1978 report, the photographs that the Warrens presented as evidence showed signs of manipulation. One of the most famous photos, which supposedly shows a ghostly figure, was analyzed by forensic photography experts who found evidence of double exposure. The Lutz family eventually retracted parts of their story. In 1993, Kathy Lutz admitted in an interview that some things were exaggerated for the book. George Lutz, before dying in 2006, declared on his deathbed that the Warrens knew we were dramatizing, but it was convenient for them to play along. Most shocking are the statements from other paranormal investigators who were present. Hans Holzer, a respected parapsychologist, declared in 1980, "The Warrens reached conclusions before investigating. Their minds were already made up about what they were going to find." Holzer also denounced that Ed Warren subtly intimidated witnesses to confirm his version of events. Documents from the Amityville Police Department show that no disturbances, emergency calls, or incidents were reported during the 28 days the Lutz family supposedly lived through. The officer who patrolled that area, Robert Piccione, declared in 1984, "If half of what they say happened had happened, we would have had reports, calls, something. There was nothing. This information about Amityville is just the tip of the iceberg. Did you know there are even more controversial cases? Hit like if you want us to make an exclusive video just about the Warrens' most questionable cases. The Perron family case, which inspired the Conjuring movie, is considered one of the Warrens' most convincing. But when you examine the original testimonies, you find inconsistencies that are impossible to ignore. The Perron family lived through terrifying experiences at their Rhode Island farmhouse during the 70s, and the Warrens were called to help. Carolyn Perron, the mother, initially described specific events: doors opening by themselves, strange smells, nocturnal whispers. But after the Warrens' intervention, her testimony changed dramatically. She began talking about demonic possessions, about a witch named Bathsheba Sherman who cursed the property, and violent physical attacks. Here's the problem. Local historical records don't support the existence of Bathsheba Sherman as a witch. Bathsheba existed, but she was simply a woman who lived on the property in the 19th century. There are no court records, neighbor testimonies, or documentation suggesting she practiced witchcraft. This narrative was created entirely by the Warrens. Andrea Perron, one of the daughters, has given contradictory testimonies over the years. In 1974, immediately after the events, she described uncomfortable but not terrifying experiences. In 1985, after years of contact with the Warrens, her testimonies included levitations, demonic attacks, and direct communication with evil spirits. In 2013, when the Conjuring movie was released, Andrea again changed her version, this time aligning exactly with the movie's narrative. Most disturbing are the statements from Nancy Perron, another daughter, who has stayed away from publicity. In a rare 2019 interview, Nancy declared, "The Warrens arrived, and everything became more intense. I don't know if they brought something with them, or if they simply convinced us that what we were experiencing was worse than it really was. But after they left, things were never normal in our family again." Medical documents from the time show that Carolyn Perron was treated for severe depression and anxiety during the years they lived at the farm. Her doctor, Dr. Richard Weldon, kept detailed notes indicating that Carolyn experienced dissociative episodes possibly related to family stress and isolation. He never mentioned paranormal phenomena in his medical reports. The Warrens claimed to have conducted a seance in the house that resulted in a partial possession of Carolyn. But there's no documentation of this session beyond the Warrens' own testimony. No other paranormal investigator was present. There are no audio or video recordings, and the description of the event changes in different interviews. Roger Perron, the husband and father, always maintained an ambivalent position about the Warrens. In his only extensive interview in 1999, he declared, "Ed had a way of asking questions that made you think about things you maybe hadn't considered before. Sometimes I wonder if he planted ideas in our heads without us realizing it." Independent researchers who visited the property in the 80s found natural explanations for many of the reported phenomena. Structural problems in the house that caused sounds, air currents that moved doors, and plumbing problems that explained the strange smells. However, these findings were never included in the Warrens' official narratives. The most troubling aspect of the Perron case is how it affected the family long-term. Two of the daughters have struggled with mental health problems for decades. Christine Perron developed severe agoraphobia that she herself links to the constant feeling of being watched that she developed after the Warrens' investigation. Cindy Perron has been in treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder since the 80s. Do you think the Warrens really helped the Perron family, or that their intervention made the situation worse? Comment what you think about the psychological impact these types of investigations can have on vulnerable families. The Annabelle doll is probably the most iconic Warren case, But it's also where we find the biggest discrepancies between the official story and documented facts. According to the Warrens, in 1970, they were contacted by two nurses who shared an apartment, Donna and Angie, who had received a Raggedy Ann doll that began showing strange behavior. The official story says the doll moved by itself, left handwritten notes, and eventually physically attacked Lou, Angie's boyfriend. The Warrens determined that the doll was possessed by the spirit of a girl named Annabelle Higgins, who had been murdered on that property years before. But here's where the problems begin. There's no record of any girl named Annabelle Higgins being murdered in that area of Connecticut during the period the Warrens mention. Local researchers have reviewed police records, obituaries, and hospital archives from 1920 to 1970, and there's no evidence of this supposed victim. Donna, one of the nurses involved, has never spoken publicly about the case. All the testimonies we know come exclusively from the Warrens and from Lou, who died in 1974 in a car accident. Angie moved to California in 1972 and has consistently refused to speak with journalists or researchers about the subject. Most disturbing are the inconsistencies in the Warrens' own statements. In 1980, Ed described the doll as extremely aggressive, with homicidal tendencies, but in 1990, he changed his description to mischievous but not necessarily malicious. In 2006, Lorraine described it as a conduit for something much darker and more dangerous. Antique doll experts have examined photographs of the original Annabelle and found troubling details. The doll showed signs of physical manipulation, reopened and resewn seams, stains that appeared artificially applied, and damage suggesting intentional manipulation to create a more sinister appearance. Investigator Joe Nickel gained access to the doll in 1994 and performed tests that revealed crucial information. Fiber analysis showed chemicals consistent with paint and dye intentionally applied. The supposed notes the doll left were analyzed by handwriting experts, who determined the writing was consistent with one person trying to disguise their natural handwriting. But the most damning evidence comes from an unexpected source. John Zaffis, the Warrens' nephew, who worked with them for decades and eventually became an independent paranormal investigator. In a 2017 interview, Zaffis revealed disturbing details. "My Uncle Ed had a particular fascination with dolls. He collected antique dolls and knew exactly how to modify them to make them look more sinister. Annabelle wasn't the first doll he investigated, but it was the one that received the most media attention." Zaffis also revealed that Ed Warren had knowledge of ventriloquism and illusion techniques he had learned in his youth when he considered being an entertainer. Ed could make it seem like sounds were coming from places where no one was. I saw him do it many times during investigations. The Warrens eventually placed Annabelle in a special glass case in their occult museum, claiming it was too dangerous to be exposed. But researchers who visited the museum noticed the case had an almost imperceptible cable system that allowed subtle movements, probably controlled remotely. The Annabelle narrative also changed significantly when Hollywood became interested in the story. Elements that never appeared in the original testimonies, such as the doll's ability to predict deaths or influence other objects, were added for the movies and then retroactively incorporated into the real story by the Warrens. Donna, the original nurse, never received compensation for the use of her story, despite the Warrens making considerable money from books, movies, and appearances related to Annabelle. In the few available legal records, it shows that Donna unsuccessfully attempted to obtain royalties for the use of her experience. Did you know that Annabelle isn't the only possessed doll in the Warrens' museum? There are at least 12 other dolls with similar stories. Coincidence or pattern? Comment what you think about this. The Warrens' Occult Museum, located in the basement of their house in Monroe, Connecticut, contained more than 3,000 supposedly cursed or possessed objects, but tax documents obtained after Ed Warren's death in 2006 reveal a very different reality from the official narrative. The museum generated substantial income. Between 1985 and 2005, the Warrens reported average annual earnings of $120,000 just from museum tours, not including book sales, lectures, or media appearances. Tours cost $25 per person in the 90s and were conducted up to 3 times a week with groups of 15 to 20 people. But here's the most disturbing aspect. Many of the objects in the museum were purchased at antique auctions, second-hand stores, and flea markets. Receipts found among Ed Warren's papers show specific purchases labeled as "for museum collection" and include antique mirrors, religious statues, and vintage dolls. Tony Spera, the Warrens' son-in-law who now manages their legacy, admitted in a 2019 interview that not all objects in the museum came with documented paranormal stories. Some were added because they fit with the atmosphere my father-in-law wanted to create. The authentication process for cursed objects was problematic. The Warrens rarely investigated the real provenance of objects they received. They simply trusted the testimonies of people who brought them, without independent verification. In some cases, they created background stories for objects that had no associated paranormal narrative. Insurance documents show that many objects were valued as normal antiques, not as supernatural artifacts. A mirror that the Warrens claimed was possessed by the spirit of a murdered woman was insured as a 19th century French mirror for $1,200. A statue that supposedly channeled demonic energies appeared in insurance records as a colonial religious figure valued at $800. The Warrens also had a questionable practice of cleansing objects that people brought them. If someone brought an object they believed was cursed, the Warrens performed a purification ritual for which they charged between $200 and $500. Afterward, if the object was interesting, visually or narratively, they added it to their collection. The museum's conditions were problematic from a conservation standpoint. Many valuable antique objects deteriorated due to lack of humidity and temperature control. Photographs of the museum taken in the 90s show significant damage to textile and wooden objects that could have been preserved with proper care. After Ed Warren's death, the museum faced multiple legal problems. Several individuals and families claimed return of objects they had temporarily delivered for investigation. In at least 6 documented cases, courts ordered the return of objects because the Warrens had no legal documentation of ownership. The museum officially closed in 2019 due to local building code violations. Inspectors found unauthorized electrical modifications, structural problems, and inadequate security systems. These findings suggest that some of the paranormal manifestations reported during tours could have been basic special effects. Chris McKinnell, a paranormal investigator who worked briefly with the Warrens in the 80s, revealed disturbing details about the museum's operation. Ed had remote control for lights, sounds, and even for some objects. During tours, he could create phenomena from his office. I saw him do it several times. I thought it was to demonstrate educational concepts, but later I realized people believed they were witnessing real paranormal activity. Ed Warren's personal library, which was part of the museum, contained books on illusion, special effects, mass psychology, and persuasion techniques. He also had manuals on ventriloquism and audio manipulation. These books suggest Ed had technical knowledge he could have used to create apparently paranormal phenomena. Currently, the collection is stored in multiple locations and is being legally disputed by various heirs and claimants. Tony Spera has announced plans to reopen the museum in a new location, but faces opposition from independent researchers demanding transparency about the object's authenticity. Do you think it's ethical to charge money to show supposedly dangerous objects to the public? Or do you believe the Warrens had the right to monetize their work? Give us your opinion in the comments. After analyzing decades of evidence, contradictory testimonies, and documents previously unavailable to the public, the question remains: were the Warrens genuine paranormal investigators or creators of a carefully constructed narrative? The answer isn't simple. It's likely that Ed and Lorraine Warren began with sincere intentions. Many of the families they helped in their early years report positive experiences and resolution of their problems. But as their fame grew, so did the pressure to maintain their reputation and income. What is clear is that they developed a system that worked perfectly for their time. They arrived at situations where families were already scared and vulnerable. They provided supernatural explanations that, paradoxically, offered more comfort than rational explanations. And they created dramatic narratives that captured public and media attention. Their methods included sophisticated psychological techniques, validation of existing fears, creation of emotional dependency, and reinforcement of narratives that families had already begun to develop. Ed Warren, in particular, had a natural talent for persuasion and creating dramatic atmospheres. But the impact of their work goes beyond their individual cases. The Warrens created the template for modern paranormal investigation. Their methods, narratives, and even their visual aesthetic have been copied by hundreds of subsequent investigators. They have influenced decades of horror entertainment and have shaped the way the public perceives paranormal phenomena. The Warrens' most problematic legacy might be how they have influenced public response to cases of possible abuse, mental health problems, and complex family situations. In many of their cases, families who needed psychological, social, or medical help received paranormal investigations instead that could have delayed appropriate treatment. However, it would be unfair to completely dismiss their work. There's a possibility that some of the phenomena they investigated were genuine. The paranormal remains a field with many unanswered questions, and current science cannot explain all aspects of human consciousness and perception. What we can conclude is that the Warrens were products of their time, an era where authority wasn't questioned as much as now, where access to independent information was limited, and where entertainment and information weren't as clearly separated. Their story teaches us the importance of critical thinking, independent verification of extraordinary claims, and the need to protect vulnerable people from possible exploitation, even when intentions seem benevolent. The Warrens created something more powerful than individual paranormal cases. They created a myth. And like all powerful myths, it contains elements of truth, fiction, hope, and fear that continue to resonate decades later. The final question isn't whether the Warrens were fraudulent or genuine. The question is what we can learn from their legacy about human nature, our desire for explanations for the unexplainable, and the responsibility we have toward people who trust us during their most vulnerable moments. This investigation about the Warrens is just the beginning. We have evidence about other famous paranormal investigators that could surprise you even more. Do you want us to investigate other famous ghost hunters? Comment who you'd like us to analyze in the next video. And if this content has made you think, share it with someone who also believes in the paranormal. The truth always deserves to be shared. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell for more investigations that reveal the truth behind the most famous myths of the paranormal world. The next case we investigate could change everything you think you know about the supernatural.